Father, we do thank you for this time together. We ask that your presence would be here in a very special way, Jesus, and that through the power of the Holy Spirit we might hear how this might apply in our ministries, and that you know, Father, the needs that we have to raise funds. You know them more intimately than we do. We couldn't even begin to dream how well you know of that. And so we just lay that concern, that opportunity in your hands, in your lap, asking you to be the one that would raise the funds for our ministries. And Father, I ask that this would be something that would resonate with all those that are here, that this is something that they could use. They would find that there is a place in their ministry that they could have not just one, but many seed dinners, and that many thousands, multiple thousands of dollars will be raised through it. So we give you this time, and we thank you for the time to be here at the EDM conference, and we praise you for this staff of EDM ministry that brings us together for us to learn much more about fund development. And to you be the honor and the glory and the power forever. Amen. Well, I would like to share a little bit just who I am, but first I want to ask, how many of you are familiar with Tony Campolo? That's better than half of you. He's a teacher in a Christian school in eastern Pennsylvania. And at one point in Tony's career, he was teaching in a university, I guess, in downtown Philadelphia. Very humorous, along with his teaching, and I've picked up some of his favorite stories, so I thought I'd just share one with you today. We purposely left with an umbrella yesterday as I flew in, rain coming down, and it reminds me of a story that Tony shares, and that is he was teaching in the downtown Philly school, commuting from the outskirts and taking a train to do so. And as he was leaving for that morning, he's got an umbrella stand near the front door and goes to reach for his umbrella as it's downpour outside, and there's none there, and he's kissing his wife goodbye at about the same time, and he starts grumbling about where's my umbrellas, and his wife says, Tony, this is where we keep them. If you have them home, that's where they are. You continuously are leaving them at school. Do yourself a favor. You're going to pay the price today. Bring some of them home. He probably has 5 or 6 of them, and she knows that better than he does. So he goes out to the car, gets wet doing that, gets wet as he has to park the car, and then goes up to the train platform. And as he finally settles down, kind of shaking off the water a bit, in the train he settles down and prepares a little bit on one of his classes and enjoys that part of it. And as he gets ready to leave for a stop, he reflectively reaches down for the umbrella that's next to him, which of course is not his. And there's an elderly woman who just puts a collar on his arm and says, young man, let go of my umbrella. And as only Tony Campolo can do, he says, well, she made my day by calling me a young man. But he apologizes profusely, saying, he forgot, blah, 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 and about his umbrella. Well, it works. His wife even phones the school to his secretary and hopes, together they, and some are probably thinking ahead. So he leaves, and he's doing the reverse commute. As he's heading down for the train platform with about 5 umbrellas under his arm, you can guess who he just sees, that elderly woman. And she looks up at him and says, my, but we've had a good day today, haven't we? Well, I hope that you'll have a great time in this session today, and that you have been having a good day. Who am I and why am I here? Well, first let me go back briefly. I was raised in the church, knew about Jesus, God, Holy Spirit, but had no idea that there was a personal relationship that I should have. And the first Christian in our family was my wife, Jolene, who is here with us today. And she started, and she became a Christian without my knowing that. I became a dropout in that process, and we had a number of children. And I did my fatherly duty of taking them to church. And then I started dropping them off at church and picking them up. And then I realized we moved to another town, they could actually walk to church. But my wife put some seeds in process, and some other people besides her praying for me without my knowing that. And I did go to a Bible study after much protestation, and finally it kind of clicked, a couples group, and I started reading the Bible a little bit and hearing other people talk about it and how it's meaningful in their everyday life. She shared the 4 laws with me and left them lying around on a couple of tables in the house in hopes that that would do it, and I did read them. And they made some sense, and I started going to her church after protesting, and but started to hearing some good Bible teaching and preaching. And my son, who was our oldest child, we moved to a new town, and he was going in freshman year in high school, and no new friends, and he's kind of unsettled, and he started going to an organization, Youth for Christ Campus Life. And I gave him quizzes as what this is organization all about. And then they met in our house one day, and I shook hands with all 50 or so kids as I came through, eyeballing, who's he involved with. And then I found I could eavesdrop on that meeting by standing at the bottom of the stairs, and I did. And it just verified some of the things I'd been hearing from him firsthand as to the relationship of God in this ministry and how it's really relevant for a high school kid. And so he was a strong witness to me, particularly as I saw him start standing up tall and straight and believe that not so much the organization but the God-centeredness that it had. So finally I gave in at age 40. The Lord found me late, but not too late. And that led to my becoming challenged. Didn't have to lead to that, but I became challenged in church to get involved. One was being on a mission committee, and that led to other involvements, being an elder, etc. And I got challenged fairly soon to get involved in ministry outside the church. We lived at that time in Metro New York, out on Long Island, and I started working with a ministry that dealt with inner city black kids in Brooklyn, New York. And then I was asked to be on the board of Youth for Christ Campus Life, the one that was so instrumental in my son's life and then was becoming instrumental in my daughter's lives. And I put a lot of time and energy in on that and became the point person as I became the chairman. And I say that by more of it often led to at board meetings, oh, woe is us. We wish we had more money to do more things. We had projects that were being unmet. We go point to the director and say, go now and do better. He'd come back next month and, raise some money, but he'd tell us how hard it was out there. And we still didn't have the monies that we really wanted. So finally, we started pointing the finger back at ourselves and said to us board members, what can we do to raise some money? And I'm going to share in that the evolution of what I call the Seed Starter Dinner. Now I'm just going to turn this off for now. And the evolution of it was that a couple of board members said, here's something that maybe we could do. Why don't we invite a few of our male friends and get a sports figure from one of the local teams who's a committed Christian, and that'd be a good reason for them to come, and they share their testimony and talk about kids and how troubled things are today, and ask them to give some money. And they did, and I wasn't a part of that aside from saying, bless you guys for doing that, and it worked well. They raised a couple of $1,000s, and we're just really pleased at the involvement that way. We're doing some other things too. And a couple of months later, one of them said, hey, that worked so well, why don't we do it again? And so they did. This time it was a failure. Failure in that just really lack of follow-through. They had two people coming. They had the speaker coming, so an embarrassment. They're phoning the speaker and the two people saying, we just, whatever excuse they gave. And so it was kind of sour, but I really thought, boy, that dinner strategy just seems to, there's something good there and something simple. So I know I prayed, but I think the Lord just laid on my mind some thoughts of putting together some elements for that. And the first dinner that we had that I afterwards termed a Seed Starter Dinner, we had 17 men, and I just stayed with the men because that's what those guys were doing. And we had some people who were involved with the ministry invite their friends. We found in that case that 1 out of 3 who were invited came to that dinner. If you compare that with banquets, the figures I understand are about 1 out of 15, or really good is 1 out of 10. Well, here we had 1 out of 3 coming to that dinner. Of the 17 that were there, 16 said yes. And they said yes to giving $1,200. All were asked to come to consider. One of the nuances is that I put together a letter, and one of the paragraphs in there, would you consider coming to give $1,200 to help fund this project? And we'll get into more details, but just mentioning what the first one did. So with the 16 out of 17 saying yes, we raised about $19,000, and we realized that here's something that can really work. And it's worked time and time again since. I kind of had a little interruption in my layman life of being a sales manager with Procter & Gamble on Long Island, and we lifted up a prayer. Sometimes when you pray, you get something that you ask for. Well, hopefully, many times we do, and one of my favorite verses, ask and you shall receive. But I prayed, Lord, would you like more of my time? And then if so, I'd need to have some other type of work that maybe I could do in 2 or 3 days a week, and I could give you back the other 2 or 3 days. And that was out there for a couple of years, and then a friend gave me an analogy, kind of like the parked car, but maybe you're like a sailboat on the water out there with no power in the sail, the engine has no gas, and it's just drifting along aimlessly, and maybe you need to be powered up. And so that made sense, and but it only made sense after I prayed a prayer, Lord, I'd be willing to do anything if I knew it was you who wanted me to do it. And so that led to our knocking on some doors and to going to Campus Crusade for Christ, one of our kind of first choices, but we knocked out in California from the East Coast and one of the furthest choices. And we were challenged to come on staff, and so we did that 13 years ago, this past November. For a good part of my time at Campus Crusade for Christ, initially I was in charge of field reps that represented Dr. Bright, the president and founder of Campus Crusade, to major donors, and that seemed to make sense with my layman's sales management abilities. But I came to realize that these ministries that Campus Crusade for Christ had could use money just like the Youth for Christ program that we had there on Long Island and the other 200 ones around the country that I had gotten involved with a little bit trying to share about the Seed Starter Dinner. And by then I had written up a little brief, how did we do it type of thing. And so now I became involved in becoming, for lack of a better title, a financial development consultant in-house to share with our ministries. We had about 30 different ministries in the United States and in many different cities in the country to be a teacher, trainer, and coach, and how to do a menu of about 5 different things. And one of those, my lead item, was the Seed Starter Dinner. So I'm going to share with you some real how-tos of how we put together the dinner. But I'd like to first just share with you a couple of comments from 2 directors at Campus Crusade for Christ. One is Ted Gandy, who's the National Director of Here's Life Inner City. Craig shared with me something called a Seed Starter Dinner. This is a clip off of a video. I just took it word for word and said, Ted, do you mind if I use this now? The concept was to go to a small group of people that were able to fund a specific project. As a result of what he shared with us, we started our first Hope Founders Dinner and held a number of dinners since that time and raised over $40,000 through them. Meaning at that time it was $40,000. And here's another ministry. Just a brief note to express our gratitude for the time you spent with us. I'm just skimming some of this. You might be interested to know that the Seed Starter Dinner, which I have termed small group dinners, are the major emphasis for our fundraising this year. We'll be doing 2 of these the first week of December. The first will be in Philadelphia and the second in Baltimore. Skipping a bit, I'm hoping to do one of those in Phoenix during the month of January and perhaps another in Florida also in January. In February and March, we'll probably do several of these within the Inland Empire. I'm so impressed with this approach and theory that I've taken the step of replacing our banquet with several of these small group dinners. Thanks for your gift to Crusade and for your gift to us. And I'm not suggesting in any shape or form that you ought to replace this with your banquet if you have banquets. But I just wanted to share a little bit of that. And I want to give you some of the elements. I've mentioned it just in the outline that I gave about our dinner, but it's friends inviting friends. You can do it by, you can mail out to a mailing list of some donors, let's say not major donors, to come to this. And the ideal, and I'll get into the details of this, is two types of levels, a $1,200 level, and everybody is being asked to consider to come to that dinner, and we'll show you a copy of a letter, or to a $600 dinner. And I'll get into the reasons why, when you're thinking of this, you ought to actually be thinking of both at the same time. Have 2 dinners, because you'll have some people you'll think of who can invite their friends who really couldn't give $1,200, but most people can give $600 or $50 a month if you look at it in another way. And if you were to use a mailing list, you might expect maybe 1 out of 8 to come. I mean, we don't have too much tracking. Not too many have done it that way, but that's about what it might be. And what I'll spend the rest of my time is talking about friends of the ministry inviting their specific friends via a letter. And then they do a phone call just asking, will you join me? They're all coming to consider to give the same amount of money, as I mentioned, is all either that $1,200 or all for the $600 dinner. And it's only a dinner. I'll give you some reasons, time permitting. You know, breakfast and lunch or brunch do not work for this strategy because there's some key elements that just come together synergistically. And it should be, if it's men, it'll work better with men, but you'll hear a testimony, and it can work with couples, but it just doesn't work quite as well, but it works very well. And you'll hear a testimony of how well it worked with couples. But if it's with men, it should be weekday night, Monday through Thursday, and you want to be careful of the Wednesday church night if that's, you know, church night in your geographic area. And if it's couples, naturally you're looking at Friday and Saturday night. Another element, which we'll explain a little bit more later, is that the dollars that you're looking for your project will equal almost to the dollar the number of giving units that are there. It's one of the synergistic elements, and it's a great element. So if you're looking to raise, and you need to be able to scale down the amount, you need to be morally and ethically able to add to, or and there'll hardly be ever no shows, but if somebody couldn't get there, you need to be able to scale down by the $1,200. And so that it still equals the number of giving units, or if you have a walk-on, which somebody who thought they couldn't come does come, you need to be able to scale up. And I'm sure with all the financial needs you have, that should be pretty easy to do for a project. The close, and I'll model that before you, but the close is actually, we'll give you a phone call a few days later, so we do let them out of the room. We let them escape, but it works, and it works very well. And I'll explain some of the reasons why that's better. And you'll find that averagely 80% will say yes to giving you the significant amount of money. In most cases, it'll be the amount of money that they come to consider to give. You will be dealing basically with strangers to your ministry, because friends of your ministry are inviting their friends, who are strangers usually to you. And so you have a stranger becoming bonded and becoming a major donor with your ministry now. And in the setting, you know, an intimate setting, this would be too big for a small dinner. I'll get into that a little bit more, but we would not really want more than 20 giving units there. Otherwise, I think mentally becomes a banquet and a little bit of the everybody's ask is nobody's ask. You should re-up them. It's not just a one-time gift. And of course, you keep in touch with them, and you have rights, and I'll mention that earlier. But they can become now askers after about 4 to 6 months to another seed start a dinner with their friends. Or you have the right now to meet with breakfast or lunch or brunch. You know, here's one, breakfast or lunch can work great. Or in their office to share with them another project, because they might be able to give much more than $1,200. We don't know that at that time. And one of the elements that we do not do, one of the don'ts, is we don't ask at the dinner. Some of you can give $900, some of you can give $1,200, some give $1,500. Who'll take 15? You know, like an auction. And I don't mean to demean that, because that works in other situations. But here it's just $1 level. Everybody there is eyeball to eyeball on the same giving level. And they're pre-qualified. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at your dinner if you're coming to consider to give it. And I'll get into the letter in a moment or two. And as I had up on the overhead, and I'll just flip it on again, why the range is basically $5,000 to $20,000 max that this would raise. And the low is about the $5,000, maybe $4,000. And it really will only take 20 to 25 hours of your time over a 6 to 8 week period. You really want to start ideally at the 8, but you can make it happen at 6 weeks. And so that's literally only about 4 hours a week of your time. And I'm including the dinner time and setting up before, like we just set up here today, and that type of thing, and breaking down. I mean, all the hours are really in there. And it's relational time, because you're meeting with friends of the ministry over a breakfast or lunch, and we'll get into that detail. I want to share via the video here the testimony of 2 Crusade staff who did hold the dinners, and I think it'll be interesting to hear from them, and I'll give you a little more of the insight. And in the back, let me know if this is not loud enough.
And most of you, like myself, didn't come on with the express desire and hunger to raise massive amounts of money. But if you're like me, over the course of years, as you grew into a position of leadership in the ministry, you realized something, that in order to pursue the dreams and visions that God has given you, funds are needed to do it. When God gave us a vision for that, with that came the realization, after 10 years in ministry, that a vision like that requires some fairly good funding. And so I was very happy to meet Craig at our leadership conference last January and hear him begin to share with us exactly what he's laid out for you in a very rapid-fire form. And believe me, we got it in the same rapid-fire form that you're getting it here too. But it was an idea that I thought, this could work. It sure is worth a try in a new situation, so we went for it. Now, we were in a situation, as Craig described, where we were starting in a new ministry. But let me just go through some of the things that we did. It deviates a little bit from the model that Craig has up here in that we invited couples because of the nature of our student venture ministry. It's a very family-oriented, community-oriented ministry. So we invited couples rather than just businessmen to come to the Seed Starter Dinner. Upon looking back and counting up the statistics as to what exactly produced the $21,500, we found that there were 65 couples or individuals invited. 65 were invited. We had 19 either couples or individuals come, giving units, if you would. People, either couples or individuals, who would make the decision to give. 19 came. The keys were in that letter, as Craig has mentioned, in which we laid out the vision for what Student Adventure was and the potential in the greater Boston area of how it could really help to raise the funds to reach these students for Christ. The key was that amount stated in the letter, $1,200, that it was stated in the paragraph that there's no obligation by coming to the dinner to give. But we will be asking our guests to consider giving $1,200. I really wondered how that was going to work. I really wondered if that was going to, we were going to have about 5 people at this dinner, and they were dubious of the whole thing too. But the Lord saw fit to use that. And of the 19 giving units who did come to consider the $1,200 ask, 17 of those, let's see, I believe 17 of those 19 actually gave that exact amount, either $1,200 on the spot or signed up at $100 a month, or one gave $600 now and $600 later. And there were only 2 who deviated from that specific amount. One gave $1,000, and the other gave, I think it was $25 a month, something like that. So that was a real vote of confidence for me to see that idea that he had, that was real wisdom in terms of a pre-conditioned ask, that they would know what they're coming in for. And the other thing was, the other factor that I think came into play was within that smaller group, there was that real sense that we here in this room can make this happen. We can do this. It wasn't the massive dispersed challenge of a banquet or of other fundraisers that I've done and that you've undoubtedly done before, where everybody's looking at their neighbor and says, oh, we'll do our little part, or at least pay for our dinner. But there was a small enough group of people there, each very selectively asked for this amount, and the spirit of the thing was, we can do it. And the Lord did it, too. There was a lot of prayer that went into this as well, and we know that the Lord is Jehovah Jireh, God our provider, and he provided exactly what we needed. But I'm here just here as testimony to say that this is a strategy that has worked for us, and we will use it again.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Going to put another tape in, and this is that was a $1,200 level type dinner, the larger end, as good as it gets. And this is a smaller one, done with a $600 level, and he'll share a little bit of the how-tos.
I'm glad I have a chance to share with you some of the successes that I've had with Craig and his Seed Starter Dinner strategy. And let me just briefly go over what I did. And in essence, I was introduced to this at a seminar out at CSU, and it sounded perfect, sounded like a great match for my ministry. So I took the manual, which Craig had put together, went back, and within just a month's time, I was able to carry out the entire plan, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, and just went through his how to do it manual step by step. And a month later, had my Seed Starter Dinner. I asked 6 businessmen to be hosts, and 3 of the 6 said yes. And each of the 3 invited on the average 12 men apiece, so we had about 35 invitees, 11 of whom said yes, so about 1/3 came. And 8 of the 11 said yes to the $600 ask. We had a $600 dinner, most of them giving the full $600. So I raised slightly over $4,000 for my ministry in just one evening with a small handful of individuals. In the meantime, I sent out quarterly reports telling them about the different things that we were doing and where their money was going towards. And then at the end of the year, at the end of the calendar year, we had a follow-up luncheon, I guess you'd call it, telling them the results and reporting back on what happened. And all of the men agreed to re-up and give again for the next year. Now, currently, I'm in the process of meeting with each one of those guys who gave and asking them to be a host themselves for this next dinner, and hoping to have at least 6 hosts this year and to raise twice as much money. So I'm a firm believer in Craig's strategy. Basically, if you follow it by the book and do exactly what he says, it's simple, it's very manageable, very doable for a guy like me in a local ministry with not a lot of spare time. And you only need a few key guys on your side. You don't need to go out and canvass a whole community. So I think it's really doable. And then because of the success, I had a number of my colleagues in Christian leadership ask me about the dinner. And in fact, two of the fellows here in the Midwest, actually three, Charlie Mack, Howard Van Cleve, and Doug Frank have done or are in the process of doing their own seed starter dinners. Howard Van Cleve was able to get together a very influential group of businessmen in Indianapolis and raise almost $12,000. And then I guess I also would like to mention that because of the success of what I was able to do in my relationship with Craig, I was able to introduce him to Jeff Power, the area director here in Illinois.
I hope that gives you a little better insight into the effectiveness of the seed starter dinner. Now I'm going to try to go through a good number of those elements and share them with you, and I'll share the letter. But a key element is that you're meeting with friends of the ministry. Now they are either people that know about your ministry or that just know you and know you're involved in ministry. And they don't have to know an awful lot about the ministry. You just need the right to be able to meet with them for, here's where a breakfast or a lunch works, or a brunch. Meet with them over the food table, and you have the right, you just basically say, I'll use my friend Jim, and you're phoning Jim and arranging to say, I'd love to get together for breakfast or lunch next Tuesday or Wednesday, whichever works best for you, and share a little bit about our ministry and run an idea by you. And, you know, what more do you need to say, basically? So one of the elements there, though, is that as you do phone and meet with them, virtually all of them will meet with you, but there's probably about a 3 out of 4 ratio who will say yes to being a part of inviting their friends. And the downside was Pete had 2 out of 3, I guess it was, who invited their friends, and that's about as low as it goes. The letter, and I'll get into you know, sharing the letter in a moment, but I'll just, we're at our breakfast, and I'm sharing with them a problem after we've caught up with each other, and you know, how the kids and how things at work and that type of thing. And now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, so we're sharing the problem, and we're sharing a solution, your solution. What's your project that's going to solve that problem? And then you're sharing that it costs money to make that happen. And quite honestly, they're probably thinking, you know, he's probably thinking, didn't know that Craig, you know, invited me to ask me for money today. And you're not there to surprise him, but you're not asking him for money. And so you're then going to say, Jim, I wonder if you wouldn't consider inviting a few of your friends to, we call it a seed dinner, or make it happen dinner, to consider helping to fund this project. You know, the approximate $12,000 or $15,000 that we have, or to pick up a good leg of it, you know, an arm of it. And what I'd like to do is put this, then you know, ask if you wouldn't send this letter to your friends, and let me just give this letter to you to read. And so you put the letter in their hands, and the first, I'll just go through a couple of the paragraphs. I'm not quite sure you can't read this in the back, but I'll be telling you the major elements in there, and you'll have a copy of this letter in the manual that you leave with today. Just as Pete said, you know, we'll give it to you, and you can cross the T's and dot the I's or do whatever you want. But in the first one is, who is Jim? What's my involvement with Craig, the ministry director? Because it's going to his friends. So I just mentioned that, you know, I took a stab, Jim, at just putting down what your involvement with me is. And so that's because of my personal involvement with, and then skipping down to the underlines, I can tell you that many lives of businessmen and professional people have been changed through the ministry. And then the second paragraph is talking about the problem. Are you aware of the siege so many men and women in our city are undergoing, and drugs and alcohol are not just affecting kids, but 1 out of 6 people have a serious problem with drugs or alcohol. Maybe some stats. In this case, we used one about Penthouse, Playboy, and Hustler, and they have, comparing it to some of the magazines, but they have combined almost half as large as Reader's Digest, the #1 magazine in America. And then the project itself, in the face of and because of these needs, XYZ Ministry is launching a counterattack. And you don't have to get into an awful lot of detail here. You're not trying to sell them in the letter as to you know, how good the project is. It's just you're giving a brief overview because it's at the dinner where they're going to learn about the project. And the next paragraph is a small group. We're asking, and in my case I'm going to use men, but it can be, you know, couples. It could be businesswomen that we have had businesswomen luncheons. we're asking a few men like yourself who have a desire to make a difference for the Lord to be our guest at a dinner, and it is a guest. I mean, they'll understand that. You're paying for it, but it's, what is it, $20, $25 at a dinner, where we will more fully present the vision of, and just, here we had a name for it. Very key statement here in the fifth one is, your coming to the dinner will not commit you in any way. Your coming to dinner will not commit you in any way, but then skipping down, but we would ask those there if they would consider contributing $1,200 to help establish the startup fund. So here's where you put the dollar amount in, no surprises. And then the last is the dinner will start at 6. If it's for businessmen, start at 6, end at 8. If it's for couples, it should start at 7 or 7:30 and end at 9 or 9:30. And they promise to have us out by 8 p.m. I'll phone you in a few days to see if you'll be able to join me. And that's the essence of the letter. It really says, I think, it all. He just slowly reads it, digests it. Then what I would be saying to them, I hope you realize, Jim, that we're not putting any pressure on you. We're just, asking you to send out a letter to a few of your friends who have a heart for the Lord's work. And the letter allows them to see if they are interested in coming and they know what they're coming to. We put the dollar amount there. It's very easy for them to say yes on the phone or say no if they want to and give a reason why not if they need to give a reason. So there's really no pressure. And even at the dinner, there'll be no pressure. And we're asking them just to come to consider to give. So, I mean, this is all no pressure, and we're not going to tell them in advance, but we're not even going to ask them to make a decision that night. We just would like to phone them a few days later. So there's no pressure all the way through. So I hope you'll say yes and invite your friends. And that's where you'll find that about 6 out of 8 will say yes, I'll invite my friends. As you do that, what I would do then is help define what are friends. And, I mean, you're probably much more aware of being able to do this than I, but, you want to answer that question for them. And we haven't defined as yet what the few are. I mean, get the yes first to, yes, I'll invite a few of my friends, but now let's define a few. And what we would ask them to do is invite 8 to 12 of his friends, and then move in very quickly to whom could they be. So here's an example. Who do you socialize with? Who are your best male friends? Who are you, do you, in any couples group, any men's groups, church, any committees, Sunday school class, just different places for you to think of people that are, close to you that wouldn't mind getting a letter from you like this. And sports, who you play golf with or tennis if you know them that well to know what they're into, organizations that you're involved in. That's just, what we don't want you to do is take out the church directory and just go through. It's that close sphere of people. And what I would do is then be prepared to give him a sheet with about 15 lines. You could stop at 12 if you want, since you said 8 to 12. And you can say, hey, if you think of a few more, I just kept a couple of extra lines, or you can flip over. I would put on there your fax number, your email address, and then ask if he couldn't get that back to you within a week's time so that it doesn't get old and cold. And it doesn't take long to sit down to do that. There's a time to say this, and this may be the time or may not. I mean, you can do it how comfortable you feel. But particularly after they've gotten yeses from their friends, you would want him to be at that dinner also, because the last sentence in the letter says, I'll give you a phone call to see if you'll join me. So he realized that he's being invited to dinner also. I mean, that goes without saying, but you want to reemphasize that. And one of the elements there, too, is that, and you can explain this at some point, that so that, why don't you consider to see if you wouldn't also be a part of helping to fund this? It would look a little awkward to your friends to say, oh, by the way, this group of 5 men over here are not a part of this. They just invited you. Wouldn't that seem a little strange to be explaining that to them, Jim? And so naturally we need to include you. And so you want to bring that up. And I'll also be, I'll be phoning you a few days after the dinner to see if the Lord lays it on your heart to be a part of that. And of course, I mean, there's no pressure. I'm not asking you now, and you don't have to make any decision beforehand, and I'll just, phone you later, and you see what you and the Lord decide. You want the letter to go out in 3 weeks' time, if it's to men or business women, prior to the dinner. And you might be way ahead of me here, but isn't it a lot easier if you send out the letter for them than if they type up that letter and have it sent out? I.e., who's going to guarantee that they send it out when you want them to send it out? Whereas if you're doing it, you can guarantee that. All you need is the names and the address from him to do that. So you want to make sure that you make that offer and just say, it would be so much easier, Jim, if I took care of that for you. You know, we can have this done at the office. And, I mean, I can easily sign your signature, you know. I mean, you probably got a scroll like I do, and most people don't know what our scroll looks like anyway. Or I can stop by and have you sign it if you'd like me to do that. And so we'll just take care of that. So were you comfortable with that first paragraph, or you want to make a little minor change there? And, you know, and I would do that right there when you're sitting there. And do appreciate it if you could, because we're on a timeline, and, you know, you can say that, you know, the dinner date is here. Now, just in case, because this does happen, and here's part of the reason why you want to have two dinners, you can say 1,200 and 600 at the same time. Remember earlier I said, here's what might happen. Jim says to me, you know, Craig, I am flattered by you thinking that I know some people who might be able to give $1,200. But, you know, in the last couple of minutes I've been thinking, you know, as I was reading the letter, I just really don't know any that could. So then I'd respond to Jim and say, you know, that's happened before. You know, I can understand that, Jim. And what we have is another dinner, very similar project. And I've got another letter here that has $600. You know, it just invariably happens in ministry. We do need to raise a lot of funds. We have a lot of vision, things going unmet. And we have found that most people can give $600 if so moved. Now, the $1,200, just as a guideline I use, I mean, you might come up with something different, is that combined family income of about $100,000. I would put people into that $1,200 category. And, you know, borderline, you'd go either way, but less than I'd say, why not invite them to a $600 dinner? And since you're going to put all the energy and time, and much of the presentation probably be fairly similar for the, you know, the two projects, why not do it, you know, Monday night, 1 week, and you could have it the next night for the other dinner, or you could have it 2 Mondays in a row, or a Monday and Tuesday. And I would probably do a Monday and Tuesday in case a 1,200 person, you know, just can't make it, but they're out of town that week, and you say, well, you know, we have another dinner going at a different level. You just have to make that decision. So does that make sense? So that's the reason why I strongly recommend going in with 2 level dinners right off the bat. Now I'll get into some of the details, you know, why the 1,200 and why the 600 and why the 2 different dinners. But the letter, just kind of following with the flow. So now we have the letter going out 3 weeks to the day, and, you know, let's figure 2-day delivery. What you want to do is, number one, you had to make sure that he did get the names back to you. And so, you know, in 7 days, on the 8th, 9th day, you give them a phone call and find out what happened, and he'll feel guilty about not doing it, et cetera. So, you know, I mean, it gets done, barring the unforeseen. And then once you have that list in hand and you're ready to mail the letter, you want to let him know that the letter's in the mail. So I'd send him a copy with an extra note to it, and saying, you know, now, Jim, we had mentioned at the bottom of the letter that you should give him a phone call. So would you do that, you know, within 4 or 5 days? And, you know, let me just think this out loud with you. Let's say if we drop the letter in the mail on Wednesday, it'll arrive by Friday. So we have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. 4th day is Tuesday, 5th day is Wednesday. So in your letter, you're saying that to them, you know, here's, you know, would you give them a phone call on Tuesday or Wednesday? And then when should you phone to find out if they did that? On Thursday, right? I mean, right afterwards, hopefully you have, you know, the office phone number, and say, just wanted to, you know, find out your results, you know, find out the good news. And what you're doing at the same time is being ready to catch the fact that maybe it didn't happen. And if that's the case, then, you know, there's a little guilt there naturally, but you need to find out if he or she is going to be able to do that. And what you need to be able to do is jump in. You know, so you just say something like, will you be able to do that in the next day or two? And find out yes or no. And if not, then what I'd like to do, with your permission, is to phone them for you. I mean, the letter went out, and they know it's our ministry, so I don't think they'll feel at all uncomfortable saying yes or no to me. But you want to make sure that, you know, it's done. And keep in mind, we're now 2 weeks away from the dinner, basically. So you need to know. If it's couples, you want to send it out 4 or 5 weeks beforehand. There's more lead time that's needed because now you're working on 2 calendars, and you're working the Friday and Saturday night agenda and the conflicts that they might have elsewhere. And you have the right to phone back sooner, naturally. But 4 or 5 days, meaning you do it 4 or 5 days after, the same timeline that way. after you're checking the phone calls, and I just want to share another overhead that picks up on what we might expect when we're meeting with the inviters, is how I term the gyms that we're meeting with. And I'm using that average of 8 meet with you, but only 6 will say yes to holding the dinner. And that could be a good reason. I mean, somebody's going to be out of town, or there's other conflicts, so they just feel very uncomfortable. You're asking them for 8 to 12 names, but we don't tell them this, but be ready to settle for 4 to 6, half the quantity, half the amount. Okay? But don't say that up front, because then their expectations are much lower. Yes? Sure. Individually over breakfast, yeah. So here's part of your, here's a major part of that 20 to 25 hours. And I'm glad you raised the question, because I think I forgot to say this. I hope to allow some time afterwards, and I'll be standing here afterwards if we don't have official time, to answer questions that you might have. And I really hope that I'll answer most of your questions. But you've got something burning. Don't hesitate to pop with it. And but odds are I'll answer it a little later on, so jot it down. So I'll use here 5 names, averagely, that they will give us. And so we're sending out letters to 5 people for 6 of the inviters. That's 30 letters going out. I'm using a ratio of 1 out of 3, which is more typical, to 1 out of 4, which is the least that will attend, the tracking that we have. And I think that's, fantastic, because some of the people just even have a conflict. They just are out of town or tied up. And so running it down, now we mentioned earlier that the inviters naturally need to be there too. But somebody might have a conflict, and actually we need to announce that conflict at the dinner too. Here's why Jim isn't here tonight, so that they know, his 3 or 4 people that are there, type of thing. So we have at this dinner 15 people there. And if it were at the 25% level, we have 13 there, just using the different percentages. 80% ratio saying yes, and most of them will say yes to the full amount. And most times you'll even be surprised it's a little better than 80%. So we have raised at that dinner basically $14,000. If we had a $600 level dinner, well, I'd be half of it naturally, and $7,200. Or if we had the lower number of attenders, the 10, well, we're raising $12,000. And at the $600 level dinner, it would be $6,000. So that's the mechanics of it, and I mean, it just seems sheer mechanical, but it just works. And it's really the key elements coming together synergistically. Moving ahead to the restaurant, just a couple of quick points there. Many of you probably plan more dinners than I have ever dreamed of, but it should be a restaurant that's easy to get to where your inviters, might work. And if it's businessmen or couples, whichever, you just need to think of where's the geography people are coming from, where are they leaving to get to the restaurant. The 6 to 8 o'clock has a real key reason, because that means that they can still have some of the evening left. They could go to a church meeting afterwards, after the 8 o'clock, leaving at 8. I can get there maybe by 8:20 or so and still catch the last half hour of a meeting. It allows them to go home and have time with the family. And probably the biggest reason is that just psychological. It doesn't seem like a whole night is taken up. Whereas if we were saying men come to 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and the whole evening is taken up that way. The restaurant should be moderately priced, not too expensive and not too inexpensive. And you just need to determine that. I want to just share briefly a friend, who I did have a friend, Jim, who I invited to the dinner. And when I had Jim on the phone, he said, Craig, I really appreciate your involvement with that ministry, and I'm sure it's a great cause, but Millie and I just don't have the money to make a contribution that way, and I don't want to take someone's seat away from them. So, please invite someone else in my place. And since nothing, and this is just me, I don't expect this to happen, but just to share an insight into this, since nothing had taken place in my mind, giving-wise, about Jim, no change. I can understand what he said. I will get those no's, and I heard a good reason. But I said, Jim, since I'm coordinating the dinner, and it's literally just 2 weeks away, we have already decided who we'll invite, and it's too late, it's a little too tacky to be asking someone now. Particularly, we need to put a letter. We really want to do it a letter, not on a phone call. So we'd love to have you come. I understand, that you just don't have the funds to make this happen. But the seat's going to go empty, and We'd love you to hear about the ministry more. And if you have a twinge of guilt, I mean, the dinner is going to cost $22. I've arranged for that. That's small money based upon what we hope to raise that night. And so if you want, you could always write a check for $22 to the ministry, but don't ever feel, the thought of that, but just to take away any guilt that way. I'll share a little later what took place from that conversation. So we've got the restaurant, and then scheduling a time frame. Let me just put another overhead on for a minute or two, and this is just my suggestion. I'm sure this doesn't come out too clear, but I'll just skim and read a little bit. Keeping in mind that we're starting at 6, if it's businessmen. 20 minutes to socialize, and you really want name tags, because most people are going to be strangers, even strangers to you. I mean, most will be strangers to you and strangers to each other. And I would have some snacks and some other things as we gather, and I would circulate, amongst them and meeting them, etc. And then the actual dinner itself, and I found that in any place you can do it within 40 minutes or so, and sometimes even enter a little earlier, and you just advance the time frame if you want. But with the restaurant, that's one of the other elements. I just make sure that it's a quiet room. We're not hearing the band clapping next door or the speakers or whatever, and elements of that. So what you want to do is you start the dinner and then thank them for coming. I'm a big fan of video. You don't have to have a video, but I'm just using that as a model and example of sharing with the problem. But you want to share the problem. You want to get the problem down from head to heart. And then to restate the problem, particularly if you're using the video, you want to share the solution, the project, and then how that's going to happen. I'm a big fan of changed live testimonies. Here's what really gets down to the heart level. You can have that on video. You're in full control. If you have somebody else's testimony, you need to introduce them, because they need to know who are the givers there and who are not. Who's staff, and you can use language at this dinner. The 10 of you here tonight can make this project happen. And I think I want to just restate that you want the dollars for the project to equal the amount of funds that you're asking for. I wouldn't do it totally pat. I'd always do it a couple $100 over. If it's a 10 there, if you want to consider $1,200, $12,000, I'd make it a $12,200, $12,300 project. And so what that says, you here tonight, if you say yes, and we're praying that you will, naturally, can make this happen as we leave this restaurant tonight. So there's the time frame. You might have a credibility person, someone who has seen the ministry up tight and close and just shares either on video, or they can be there and you can share. Al is here to share. He's seen our ministry. He's going to share a little later with you how he knows about our fiscal accountability and how he's seen changed lives as a result of the ministry. So we've shared that, and we're now at the close. And the elements of the close are a little unique and different. And that is, why don't I just model it, and then we'll see the principles that evolve with that. What I would do is just recap very briefly again what we've seen. You've seen the problem. You've heard us. And you've seen that we've got a solution in hand. It's just waiting to be done, but we need the funds to make it happen. And so we're so grateful for you coming here tonight to consider giving the $1,200. I think you probably added it up. If the 10 of you here say yes, the project is done. But we're not going to ask you to make a decision tonight. We'd like you to have some time to pray and reflect on it. So the way we'd like to leave it is that we'll give you a phone call in the next 3 to 4 days to see if the Lord has laid on your heart to say yes. And the person who invited you here tonight, this is an optional type of thing. The person, you need their approval to say this. The person who invited you here tonight will give you that call, or if they're unable to in the blitz of their busyness, I'll give you the phone call. So we look forward to talking to you, and naturally, after the first question, which we hope is yes, we'll ask you the second one, and that is, how will you flow the money? And we'll ask you naturally, is it the full $1,200, which we're hoping naturally will be yes. The accountant has said it's much easier if you write a check once, but naturally you can divide by 3, 4, or however it might work for you. because we do have some staggered needs. We don't need every dollar up front, but it certainly helps if most of it is there right up front. And then we'll just ask you the third part of that question is when will you be able to send it in, the first or the complete amount? When will that hit the ministry office? So thanks again, and it's about 7:45. We thought we might be able to let you out a little bit early, but we want to leave ourselves a little leeway, and you'll find most times that you do have that. And I would not ask for any questions. If someone has questions, they can come up afterward. I've just learned from experience, if you ask questions, if I asked you, do you have any questions, you're going to start thinking, what should I ask? And you just never know. There can be a left field question that's coming up that should not be something that you're handling at that point in time, particularly after you just had a great evening and a close and blah, blah, blah. So if someone has a burning question, they can pop, and I could have just said, I'd appreciate if we could just wait a little later for that, and I'll answer that in great detail, after the dinner type of thing. So that is the elements of the Seed Starter Dinner. And I'd bring up some other key points that I've mentioned this, and my wife will attest to this better than I can, that I'm not an expert on women. She's saying, hands down, he's not. I have just found that if it's businessmen, it works better. And I think it's one of the, not that businesswomen can't be make it happen type of people. I mean, there's many of them today that are really like that. But the psychology of many businessmen is exactly that, make it happen. And this dinner, rather than giving money to the big $40,000 or the $400,000 need, it's giving money to the $12,000 need, which we can do here today. And that excites a lot of men. That's the make it happen element. The woman might be asking something like this. Weren't we going to take the kids to a Disney, or weren't we going to do a ski weekend, and where are we going to get this extra $1,200? And just because she's dealing with money at a different level, the income of the house, the operation of the house, the cleaners, the food, etc., money for the kids, for school, etc., etc. And he's thinking more of the retirement and the other expendable, just in case something happens, where do we have some extra money set aside? Not that she's not aware of that. So that's just one of the elements. Her being there is often a real positive. Oh, honey, we need to really help solve this. But it's usually the money's just a little bit less. But as Mike Lynch gave an example on the first video with couples, it certainly works. But I still always recommend businessmen that way. You can be as small as 4 or 5 people and have a very effective dinner. One of the elements at the dinner, though, is I would have everybody in like a U shape or a rectangular, where we're not seeing the backs of, we're eyeball to eyeball. And a U really works because you can see everybody there, and you can use actually the podium as your speaking area. And it's just, once again, we're all there to on a same level to make this happen. My friend Jim, I should have shared, at the close, he did come to the dinner, and Jim came up to me after the dinner, as I just gave you that sample close, and said, Craig, you don't have to make the phone call. You've got the money. Now, I appreciated that, as 3 others came up to me at that dinner of 17 people there. And I wasn't asking for that, but they just volunteered to come up and tell me. So don't be surprised at that. The element that is there that I have no idea, and this is another not knowing about women, but I know a little bit, that if in a businessman's dinner, if you were to send a letter to my house, that's a little curiosity flag for my wife. She'd say, I wonder who that was from. Or if it's clear on the outside of the envelope who it's from, I wonder why he's sending Craig that letter. And so that letter gets read in the house. I'm quite sure, 99% of the households. So it's no mystery as to what I was being invited to. And quite honestly, I couldn't go out on, let's say, Monday or Tuesday night without saying where I'm going, right? And am I going to leave without, if I don't volunteer, without her saying, what are you going there for? So there's things that go on behind the scenes that I have no idea. And with my friend Jim and Millie, I have no idea, what took place from Jim's. We can't, we don't have it to, you got it. I mean, he's just, Johnny on the spot. And quite honestly, I don't, I've run this through the experts. Should we try to close that night? Should we have a response device? And the first dinner we didn't. And the experts that I run it by says, no, it's just there's something better about this. And I think the better is it gives them time to allow the Lord to work. If you've been at a banquet or somewhere, now let's pray, and okay, Lord, we thank you for this time, and would you lead them in this decision? So, we're making this decision, and I do know that, I don't know why they came if they weren't going to give money, but I know at many banquets people leave without giving money, or hardly pay for their cost of being there. So I don't know all the dynamics that goes in, but I have found that I don't think we lose anyone, but I think we even gain them. And the same thing by using a letter. There's something special about that. They can initially say, oh, I don't want to go to that. Like Jim could, got that letter, I don't want to go to that. But before my phone call, the Lord could have changed Jim's thinking and said, Jim, I really, now the Lord can just kind of give us little nudges. We get that feeling 2 days later, thinking differently than we did the first day. And so we come to that dinner. I think I've said this, but I'll just restate it. If you think of doing this at a breakfast or a lunch, there's some ministries that tried it, so in my little manual I usually put here's some of the things that don't do because it led to unsuccess. Not that you can't raise money at breakfast or lunches, but if you think about it, think of all the time pressure that's on someone coming to, I don't know, 7:30, 7 o'clock, what time do you want the breakfast? You can't have it any more than an hour, right? Or basically you shouldn't. And if you're going to do it on a week, then that's doomed for total failure probably. And then they're thinking of what to do afterwards. What's going on at work, this meeting, or who I've got this phone call with, or whatever. So, and driving in the rush hour traffic and all those things, or just do it at lunch. You've got them coming from a busy day, squeezing this in, leaving for the busy day afterwards. Whereas at a dinner, the day's done. You might have a little rush hour traffic, and that's the extent of it, and I won't have any more rush hour when I leave the dinner because by 8 o'clock, the rush hour will be over, if there's even that. And then it's just so much more relaxed. The ambiance is so much greater. We're in a quiet room. I've got a nice meal. I've got time. We get the 2 hours together. It's just so many things that are just there. And then, of course, we even let them leave the room without making the decision, although I think you'll find that probably many have made the decision then. So that's why I say always a dinner and never a brunch, lunch, breakfast. You do want to keep in touch with them. You want to put out at least a bi-monthly, and I would really recommend at least every 6-week letter to let them know how their money is being spent. They need to know that, and it's being spent wisely, and just give them a ministry update. Now, you also, before we get to that update letter, you're having the phone call by the inviter or yourself, and you want to do that within the 4 to 5 days, after they left. No longer. It starts getting old and cold after that. And if the person inviting said they'll do it, naturally you're phoning them the next day at work, ideally so early on. If they haven't done it, you find out, are you able to do it tonight? And if not, then you jump in. And you might even decide up front, I'll just make all of those 15 phone calls. What you want to do is do a little high-touch mail. You want to do a reminder to those who said they're coming. Even though you probably think everybody in town knows where that restaurant is, gives you a good excuse. So glad you're going to join us at the dinner. You can get it personalized. Jim told us that you're coming. Look forward to meeting you, or look forward to seeing you again if you already know them. And here's an attached map. And so you put that out literally the day you found, or at least a week's lead time. And then I would even ask the inviter to give him a phone call, which is another reminder to him, and ask him if he wouldn't phone his friends, 2 or 3 nights away. And, maybe they'd meet somewhere beforehand, but just as a reminder. So I do all that reminder touch to make sure they're coming. You have the right to, after 4 to 6 months, and you only gain the right once they know that their money is being spent wisely and they know that ministry is really taking place with this and they feel pleased at what they've contributed, to meet with them again. And I would look at it as 2 ways. You could now ask them to be the seeds for a new dinner. They've been through it. You're meeting over lunch or breakfast. You pull out the letter. You go through the whole cycle again. But now it's through somebody who's very warm. And they will really be real fans of your ministry because you've been in a very intimate, 10, 15 people type of thing. It's not the 150, 300 people in a large gathering. You've been there up close and tight, just as the first couple of rows are. This is how small it would be if we just took the first couple of rows, and we'd be in a U, would be even closer. And but you have the right to have them ask to be inviters to their friends. You also have the right to ask if they would consider another project. You just do that old smile again and say, just never seems to stop happening, that we have more need for more money. It just seems the Lord gives us more vision and new ways that we can, change the lives of people for Him. And so you can ask them, my friend Jim again, Jim, I wonder if you might consider being able to help solve this $2,500 need that we have, and I just explained a little bit. Or could you perhaps tackle this $5,000 project or some part? And you get yes, no, or let me consider, probably, would be probably more the answer. And I don't think I could do too much on the 5,000. Let me see if Millie and I could handle this 2,500, or a good portion of it, or whatever the response might be. And you have the right to ask to meet in their office, which can give you better insights to, asking them about their job and seeing what their responsibilities are, maybe get a little better idea about their income level that way and things of that nature. And plus, you can always ask their friends. I mean, they're now, they're part of the inner group. I don't know that you know exactly, but what kind of range do you think, Jim's income is in? Is it over the 200,000 or what? And, he can just tell you, gee, I feel uncomfortable sharing even a little bit I do know, or probably not, or maybe a little more, or a little less, or whatever. But it can just give you some ideas so that you can better projectize your monies. And I put a flow chart, which I really don't want to take too much time to explain, but it just starts out with the, I'm sure you can't read this in the back, but 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 weeks, going through just some of the things. And number one, you need to, determine ideally at 8 weeks, but you can pull it off at 6 weeks, maybe even 5 if you're really running strong. But just some reminders, so you'll have this in the details, just to give you a little, thinking it through in the big picture to the different elements that I've shared here. And to just recap, and this is maybe where I'm, if you want to, I'm on your first page, but I hope you realize, as I've said, there's no real pressure involved in this. Yet, I'll take that back and amend that and say, yes, there is, because there's really loving, gentle pressure of they're in a group, all coming to consider to give the same dollar amount. You here can make this happen. And they wouldn't be coming if they're already pre-qualified, right? They wouldn't be at your dinner if they probably didn't think that they could, if so moved, give you that $1,200. Or maybe the least they might say is, boy, if I went to that dinner, $1,200 would just beyond our means. But I bet they wouldn't mind me there if I gave, $900, $700. And so sometimes you get those little surprises that way. But I don't think you'd mind them still being at your dinner, would you? There is no choice. That's one of those elements. We've had a ministry or two try the choice, and it just gets muddled and confused. So it just works. You can be under-qualifying people, but in 4 to 6 months, if you'll follow up and just use this, a little bit of a cycle of fund development here with these new key donors to your ministry, I would not, leave them there. I would go and ask them either to be inviters to a new dinner, or I'd ask them if they fund another project. And the very least is that in a year's time, I would go and ask them to re-up to the same project if he has an ongoing need, or to a new and similar project. And that's the one time that you don't have to have them all at a dinner, but I would even do a dinner again for all the good reasons I gave before, but some won't be able to make it on that one night that you settle on. So then you can catch up with them during the day at a lunch or breakfast. We had a great dinner the other Tuesday night, and you can even share, everybody there said yes, or however whatever. And we're certainly hoping that you'll say yes. You can, bring your little laptop if you have, streaming video, show a little of this, whatever, PowerPoint. You can bring it live, besides just verbal, if you want to, or you just do the verbal. But so they will re-up again. And they are just, a whole new bonded major donor to your ministry. And I think that's the key elements. I would like to allow some time for questions, but as I started with the Kapalo story of we've had a great day today. I hope you felt that this has been a good session. And I really pray that this has been one that you can walk away and put into practice. And I've got this little curiosity button too. So if so, do me a favor and let Craig know. Just drop me an email or drop me a note or whatever, or give me a phone call.